HOA Karen called cops when I refused to remove my fence in the lake. HOA She got sued for trespass. The neighborhood around Lakeview Meadows had always looked calm from the outside. Neatly cut lawns, bright flowers near the sidewalks, and a quiet lake at the back made it seem like the kind of place where everyone lived in peace. For Harris, who had just moved in with his wife and little son, it looked like the perfect home. He wanted safety for his child, and since his backyard sloped down toward the water, he decided to put up a wooden fence. The fence wasn't tall or flashy. It was just high enough to keep his toddler from wandering toward the lake, and it matched the natural look of the yard. The fence stood fully inside Harris's property line. Before building it, he checked his plat map and the papers that came with his house when he bought it. Everything seemed fine. He didn't cover any shared trail, nor did he block the HOA's easement. He even left space on the side where the lake path ran, making sure neighbors still had access. For him, it was just common sense. But not everyone saw it the same way. A few days after the fence went up, Harris was working in his garden when an older woman approached. She introduced herself as Mrs. Caldwell, a longtime board member of the Lakeview Meadows HOA. She didn't greet him with a smile. Instead, she looked straight at the fence and said in a sharp voice, "We don't allow fences near the lake." Harris was surprised. He asked politely, "Is that written somewhere in the HOA rules?" "I went through my paperwork, and I didn't find anything about fences inside private property." Mrs. Caldwell gave a quick shrug. "It's always been that way. No fences by the lake. It ruins the view." She promised to send him the documents later but didn't explain further. Then she turned and left, clearly unhappy. Harris felt uneasy but not shaken. He believed he had done his homework. Still, to avoid trouble, he waited for her email. Days passed. Nothing came. Then, one Friday morning, Harris found a yellow slip taped to his door. It was an HOA violation notice demanding that he remove the fence immediately. The letter said his fence broke community rules, though it didn't point to any specific written clause. It also warned that if he didn't take it down by the end of the week, further action would be taken. Now he felt worried. He sat at his desk with the notice and opened his binder that held all the HOA papers. He flipped through the C&Rs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that set the rules for the community. He checked the section about fences. It only said homeowners couldn't build on the HOA's land or block shared areas. His fence did neither. He pulled out his survey papers, and they confirmed his fence sat fully inside his line, with plenty of space for the HOA's shoreline trail. That night, he sent an email to the HOA board. In calm words, he explained his fence was safe, inside his property, and not blocking any path. He even offered a compromise: he would add a gate facing the trail so that in case of an emergency, the HOA or rescue workers could pass through. He asked for a written explanation of which rule he had broken. The reply came quickly, but not how he expected. The message was short: the fence must go by Friday. No exceptions. Harris sighed. He wasn't trying to fight, but it seemed the board wasn't willing to listen. On Friday afternoon, something even stranger happened. While Harris was trimming his lawn, two police officers walked up his driveway. Behind them was Mrs. Caldwell, pointing at his backyard. "Sir," one officer said politely, "we received a call about a dangerous obstruction near the lake." Harris led them to his fence. The officers walked around, looked at the posts, and shook their heads. "This looks like a civil matter between you and the HOA," one of them explained. "We don't see any criminal issue here." The officers left after telling both sides to work it out, but the sight of police at his door unsettled Harris. He realized this was not a simple disagreement anymore, it was turning into a battle. That night, Harris installed a doorbell camera near the gate. He wanted proof of everything that happened from now on. He also adjusted the latch so the gate would self-close, making sure no one could claim it was left open and unsafe. His wife tried to calm him. "Maybe it will end now that the police said it's not their issue," she suggested. But Harris wasn't so sure. He had seen the determination in Mrs. Caldwell's eyes. In the days that followed, Harris noticed small changes. A few neighbors looked at him differently when he passed by. Some smiled and said they liked the fence because it looked neat. Others avoided eye contact, as if siding with the HOA. Mrs. Caldwell walked by more often, her phone in her hand, snapping pictures of the fence from different angles. Harris tried to stay calm. He watered his garden, played with his son, and waved at the neighbors who greeted him. But deep inside, he felt the tension building. He knew the fence was right. He knew the documents supported him. But he also knew the HOA had power, and some people would fight hard to protect tradition, even without written rules. As he sat on his porch one evening watching the sunset over the lake, he told himself something important: "I'll stand firm, but I'll do it the right way. I'll keep everything in writing, I'll stay respectful, and I'll let the truth speak for itself." He didn't know it yet, but the real conflict was only just beginning. The fence wasn't just wood and nails, it had become a line between fairness and power in the community. And Harris was not planning to step back. The weekend after the police visit, Harris tried to focus on his family. He took his son out to the park, helped his wife with groceries, and even spent some time reading on the porch. But he couldn't ignore the feeling that something else was about to happen. The violation notice on his door had not been withdrawn, and the short, cold reply from the HOA still lingered in his inbox. On Monday morning, he got his answer. When he stepped outside to water the lawn, he noticed a new notice stuck on the mailbox. This one was printed in bold letters, warning of daily fines if the fence was not removed. It also said the issue had been posted on the HOA's online portal for the community to see. That evening, Harris logged onto the HOA website. There, under the community news section, was a message titled, "Unsafe Fence by the Lake." The post didn't mention Harris's name, but the picture was clear. It was his backyard. The message said the fence posed a danger to residents and reduced the natural beauty of the shoreline. It ended with a warning that non-compliance with HOA rules could lead to liens against a property. Harris sat back, frustrated. He had offered compromise, asked for written clarification, and even adjusted his fence with a self-closing gate. But instead of discussion, the HOA board member had chosen to pressure him publicly. The next morning, things escalated further. While Harris was at work, his doorbell cameras sent him a notification. He opened the app and froze. The footage showed Mrs. Caldwell and a handyman walking straight into his backyard. They unlatched the gate, stepped inside, and began measuring the fence with a tape measure. One of them marked the wood with chalk, while the other wrote notes on a clipboard. After a few minutes, they left, but not before sticking a red tag onto one of the fence posts. When Harris came home and saw the red tag, he felt anger rising. He had given clear notice in his email: no one was allowed on his property without permission. This was not just rudeness, it was trespass. He saved the footage to his computer, then printed out still images with the time and date. That night, he drove to the local police station and filed a polite report. He told the officer he wasn't asking for arrests, only for documentation. The officer agreed, wrote up the report, and attached Harris's evidence. "It's always better to have a record," the officer said. "If this continues, you'll have proof that you asked them to stop." Back home, Harris drafted a cease and desist letter. He kept it professional, not emotional. In it, he explained that the board member and anyone acting on her behalf were not allowed to enter his yard without his consent. He stated clearly that future violations would be considered trespassing. He printed the letter, signed it, and sent it via certified mail to the HOA's office. At the same time, Harris wanted to strengthen his case. He called a licensed surveyor to perform an as-built survey, a fresh check of the property lines and the exact location of the fence. A week later, the surveyor arrived with equipment, carefully measuring the yard, the posts, and the metal pins in the ground. After hours of work, the surveyor handed Harris the results. The fence sat entirely inside his property line. Not only that, but the survey also showed the HOA's easement started several feet beyond the fence. His gate opened outward, providing access if needed. Harris felt relief. Now he had professional proof. He scanned the report, attached it to an email, and sent it to the board with a calm message: "Attached is a certified survey showing the fence is inside my property and outside the HOA's easement. I have also added safety features. I propose we settle this with a small adjustment. I'll stain the fence to match community colors and place a sign on the gate for emergency access. I hope this resolves the matter peacefully." He clicked send and waited. The reply came 3 days later, not from Mrs. Caldwell but from the board secretary. The email was short: "Your fence is still in violation. A hearing will be scheduled." Harris shook his head. They had ignored his evidence and his offer. Soon after, he received a formal letter saying he was invited to a fine hearing. The problem was, the notice gave only 2 days warning, not the required 1-week notice listed in the HOA's own bylaws. The hearing was set for a Thursday evening at the clubhouse. When Harris walked into the clubhouse that night, he carried a heavy binder. Inside were his survey papers, the police report, his emails, and printed screenshots from the doorbell camera. A dozen residents sat in folding chairs, some curious, others whispering. At the front table, 5 board members sat in a row. Mrs. Caldwell was there too, sitting upright, her arms crossed. The meeting began with the board chair reading a statement: "The homeowner has built a fence that violates community standards by the lake." Harris raised his hand. "Excuse me, could you please show me which section of the C&Rs prohibits my fence?" The chair hesitated. Mrs. Caldwell leaned into the microphone. "It's always been the rule. No fences near the lake. Everyone knows that." Harris opened his binder and read aloud the exact lines from the C&Rs. "The rules say no structures may block HOA easements or common areas. My fence does not. The survey shows it. Would you like to see the drawings?" The room grew quiet. Some neighbors leaned forward, curious. The chair shifted uncomfortably. "Even if it's not written, the fence reduces the uniform look of the community. That's enough reason." Harris stayed calm. He slid copies of his survey and photos across the table. "This is a certified report. This is my doorbell footage of a board member entering my yard without permission. This is the police report documenting it. I am happy to compromise on color, style, or safety adjustments. But removing the fence is not justified by the rules." The board exchanged uneasy looks. Finally, the chair said, "We will deliberate and inform you of the decision." When the meeting ended, some neighbors approached Harris. A woman whispered, "We had fences on this side years ago. They didn't bother anyone." Another man nodded quietly, "Stay strong. They can't just make up rules." That night, Harris knew the fight was far from over. But he also knew he was no longer standing alone. He had the survey, the video, the police report, and now even quiet support from neighbors who remembered the past. The fence had become more than just a safety measure. It had turned into a test of fairness, proof that written rules mattered more than tradition or power. And Harris was ready for the next step. The board took a week to send its decision, but the wait did not feel quiet. Each day, Harris noticed a new ripple in the neighborhood. A couple who walked their dog used to wave, now they hurried past with tight faces. A father at the playground asked in a careful voice, "Is your fence really blocking the trail?" Harris answered gently, "No, sir. There is a clear path. The survey shows it." He chose calm words every time. He wanted facts to speak louder than emotion. On the 7th day, an envelope arrived from the HOA. Inside was a single page that said "Fine approved," with a daily amount listed if the fence stayed up. It did not cite the line of the rule he was supposed to have broken. It did not mention the survey he had sent. It simply repeated that his fence was inconsistent with the lake standard. At the bottom was a note that liens could follow if fines were not paid. Harris set the letter on his kitchen table and read it twice. His wife put a hand on his shoulder. "We knew this might come," she said softly. He nodded. He was not angry, he was determined. He opened his binder and slipped the letter behind tab number 1, Official Notices. That evening, the HOA portal displayed a new post with a photo of his yard taken from the trail. The headline used strong words about non-compliance and community safety. It did not name him, but everyone knew which yard that was. Comments appeared below the post. Some were kind: "I walked past, the path is clear." Others were harsh. Harris did not reply. He saved a copy of the page and printed the thread for his records. He did not want to argue online. He wanted everything in writing and handled through proper channels. 2 days later, his doorbell camera chimed while he was at work. He opened the live view. The image showed Mrs. Caldwell in a sun hat, holding a clipboard, and a different handyman from before. They pushed the latch, stepped in, and began to pace the length of the fence, counting boards in a low voice. Chalk lines appeared again on the wood. They took close photos of the hinges and the latch. After several minutes, they left, closing the gate behind them. Harris saved the footage to 2 different drives. He printed still frames. Then, in a calm tone, he left a voicemail at the HOA office. "This is a reminder that I sent a cease and desist regarding entry onto our property. Please have board members and vendors respect that notice. I'm available to answer questions by email." He followed with an email containing the same message and attached the certified mail receipt for the cease and desist. He did not accuse, he did not threaten. He simply documented. That night, he opened a fresh legal pad and made a list. At the top he wrote 3 goals: protect family safety, follow the actual rules, keep everything respectful. Under that, he wrote tasks. The first was confirm city code. In the morning, he called the city building department and asked about fence permits for a low wood fence inside a yard near a lake. The inspector said such fences often did not need permits if under a certain height, but each case depended on location. The inspector offered to visit. The following day, the inspector measured, checked setbacks, and looked at the slope. Afterward, he gave Harris a brief letter. The fence did not violate city code or require a permit at its current height and location. The inspector reminded him that HOA rules were separate from city rules, but the letter would address any claim that the fence was illegal under city law. Harris scanned the letter and added it to the binder. He sent a polite copy to the board: "For your records, city code is satisfied. HOA standards are a different question. I am still open to appearance adjustments. Please cite the controlling provision for removal, if any." He pressed send and waited. Meanwhile, private messages began to appear in his inbox from neighbors he barely knew. One wrote, "We had a small fence 3 houses down 5 years ago. Nobody said anything." Another attached a photo from an old neighborhood newsletter showing a lakeside yard with a waist-high picket fence and flower boxes. The headline read "Garden of the Month." Harris thanked them and asked permission to print the images. Some said yes, some asked to remain unnamed. He respected every wish and labeled each page in his binder with the date received and the source's preference. By midweek, a formal letter from the HOA's attorney arrived. It repeated that the fence must be removed and that fines would accrue, and it warned of lien proceedings. Harris read it carefully. The letter still did not point to a specific clause forbidding fences inside private property. It referred to visual uniformity and historical standards. Harris understood that associations could have style rules. He also knew they had to apply those rules consistently and base them on written standards. He placed the attorney's letter under tab number 2, Council correspondence. That night, after putting his son to bed, Harris opened his laptop and looked up a local firm that handled property and HOA matters. He scheduled a consultation. When he met the attorney, a calm woman with neat glasses and a careful way of listening, he laid out the binder on the table like a map. He showed the C&R's language on easements, the city letter, the as-built survey, the violation notices, screenshots of the portal posts, and the doorbell footage timeline. He spoke in short, clear sentences. He did not exaggerate. The attorney nodded. "You've done excellent documentation," she said. "There are two main tracks here. First, we can seek a declaratory judgment that your fence complies with the recorded rules, coupled with an injunction to stop fines and lien threats while the court reviews. Second, we can address the entries into your yard. You gave notice not to enter. Further entries after that notice raise trespass issues. That claim can be separate and may involve the board member personally." Harris asked a simple question: can we still offer a compromise on appearance? "We will offer it again," the attorney said. "Courts appreciate homeowners who try to resolve things reasonably. We'll propose stain color, post caps, and an emergency access placard. But we will also ask the HOA to identify the exact written rule they rely on. If they can't, they should not demand removal." They drafted a formal demand letter that afternoon. The letter was calm. It attached the survey, the city inspector's note, and still frames from both entry incidents. It repeated the offer: stain, caps, placard, gate orientation. It requested withdrawal of the fines and a written citation to any specific, recorded rule if the HOA believed removal was required. It asked that all communication go through council. Harris approved the letter. It went out via email and certified mail. 2 days later, the HOA's attorney responded with a firm tone. The letter said the HOA would not withdraw fines and would proceed if the fence was not removed within 10 days. It again cited visual uniformity and a long-standing no-fence expectation at the lake, but did not include the page and line of any recorded document. The letter did not address the entries into the yard. Harris's attorney slid the letter back across the table and tapped the calendar. "We will file before the 10 days. In the background, the portal discussion kept stirring. A neighbor posted that the fence looked fine and safe. Another replied that rules were rules. A third asked to see the rule itself. The thread grew quiet. Harris watched it without joining. He saved another copy. One evening, a former board member called him in a hesitant voice. "There was talk years ago about a no-fence rule near the lake," the man said. "It never became official because of the easement layout. We decided to handle it case by case if someone blocked access. But we never recorded a blanket ban." The man was nervous about being named. Harris thanked him and wrote a careful note: "Former board member states no adopted ban, prefers confidentiality." He dated it and filed it. As the court filing neared, stress pressed into the small spaces of daily life. Harris felt it when he poured coffee in the morning and when he folded laundry at night. He kept his tone gentle with his son and his wife. He went on his usual jog around the lake to keep his mind clear. He reminded himself that fairness moves slowly but steadily when supported by facts. On a quiet Tuesday, Harris's attorney walked him through the paperwork. The complaint sought a declaratory judgment that the fence complied with the C&Rs because it did not occupy the HOA's easement or a common area and because no recorded rule prohibited a low fence inside the property line. It requested an injunction to pause fines and lien threats while the court considered the matter. In a separate count, it alleged trespass based on the entries after Harris's cease and desist. The complaint attached exhibits: the survey, the city letter, the violation notices, copies of the portal posts, the certified mail receipts, and the timestamps from the doorbell video. Each exhibit had a clear label. The tone remained professional. They filed the case at the courthouse that afternoon. Harris felt a mix of relief and heaviness as he stepped back into the sunlight. It was not a path he had hoped to take, but it was a path marked by rules, not rumors. Service papers went out to the HOA and to Mrs. Caldwell. The process server returned affidavits the next day. Word moved quickly through the neighborhood. Some people avoided eye contact, others offered a quiet thumbs up as he passed. A neighbor 2 doors down left a small note on his porch: "We support safety and fairness. If you need a witness about the clear trail, we'll help." Harris placed the note, with permission, into the binder. He now kept the binder on a shelf near his desk, not hidden, not displayed just there, like a steady witness. That week, a local reporter sent an email asking for an interview. Harris replied politely that he would not comment while the case was active. He believed the calm way was the strong way. Still, the fact that the situation reached outside the neighborhood had an effect. The next day, a different board member sent him a careful email: "Perhaps we can revisit the appearance compromises." Harris forwarded it to his attorney and responded through counsel, restating his original offer and asking again for the precise rule, if any, that required removal. In the evenings, he continued small improvements that nobody asked for but everyone could appreciate. He swept the trail edge, pulled weeds by the path, and added a tiny reflective tab to the inside of the gate latch so emergency workers could see it at night. He printed a small, tasteful sign that read "Emergency Access Lift Latch," and placed it on the gate facing the trail. He took photos of these updates, dated them, and filed them as Exhibit E in his binder. He was not only defending a fence, he was showing the spirit in which it was built: safety first, community second, style close behind. At the end of part 3 of his journey, the paperwork stood in order, the facts were clear, and the court had the case. The HOA had doubled down, he had stayed steady. The board member had entered his yard again, he had documented calmly and chosen the legal path. Neighbors had argued online, he had spoken only with evidence and offers. The line in the ground remained wood and nails, but it now carried another meaning. It said that written rules matter, that respect matters, and that a homeowner can stand firm without raising his voice. The next step would belong to the process: discovery, testimony, and the careful weight of truth. Harris was ready. He did not know exactly how the judge would view every detail, but he carried one clear thought with him as he turned off the porch light that night: when you walk straight, you leave straight footprints. The court filing marked a turning point in the conflict. For weeks, Harris had carried the weight of unfair notices, online posts, and unwanted intrusions into his yard. Now, for the first time, the matter moved into a place where facts, not feelings, would decide. The judge would look at papers, dates, and words written in black and white. That gave Harris a quiet confidence. The first stage was discovery. Through their attorney, the HOA had to provide internal emails, meeting notes, and documents they relied on to justify the fence removal. Harris's attorney explained how this process worked. "They can't just say long-standing tradition anymore," she told him. "They must produce records that show what rules exist. If none exist, then they cannot pretend otherwise." When the discovery documents arrived, Harris sat with his attorney at a long conference table. At first, the stack of papers looked official, filled with formal letterheads and typed minutes. But as they read through them, a clear pattern appeared. Meeting notes from years earlier showed that a no-fence policy had been discussed but never adopted. An old draft of a lake design handbook contained a sentence about banning fences, but a margin note in red ink said, "Remove contradicts easement rights." That handbook had never been circulated or recorded. Even more telling were the emails. One from Mrs. Caldwell to another board member said, "If he doesn't take it down, maybe we can just cut the lock ourselves. People need to see action." Another email showed her encouraging a neighbor to complain loudly so that pressure would build. Harris's attorney placed sticky notes on each page. "This is not good for them," she said softly. "It shows intent to enforce something that isn't in the rules. It also shows self-help actions that the court will not appreciate. The depositions came next. Harris was nervous, but his attorney prepared him. Answer simply. Don't guess. Just tell the truth. Sitting in a small room with a court reporter, he answered each question with calm words. He explained why he built the fence, how he checked his survey, and how he offered compromises. He showed his binder when asked, flipping to tabs with dates and documents. Then came Mrs. Caldwell's deposition. Under oath, she admitted stepping inside Harris's yard even after receiving his cease and desist letter. I had to measure personally, she said. Harris's attorney played the doorbell footage. The timestamps matched exactly what she had just admitted. The room fell silent except for the click of the keyboard as the court reporter typed. When the former board member was deposed, he confirmed what Harris had already suspected. The no-fence rule was discussed but never passed, he said. We realized it didn't fit with the recorded easement rights, so we dropped it. His words, calm and direct, undercut the entire claim of a long-standing policy. The as-built surveyor testified next. He explained the property pins, the measurements, and how the fence stood entirely inside Harris's line, with the HOA easement beginning several feet beyond. He also pointed to the gate that opened outward, allowing emergency access. His professional tone left little doubt. Finally, the city inspector gave a brief statement confirming that the fence did not violate city code. It is a private covenant issue, he said, but from a municipal perspective, the fence is fine. By the time depositions ended, the picture was clear. Harris had followed the written rules. The board member had enforced something that never officially existed. And she had entered his yard even after being told not to. At the preliminary injunction hearing, the judge listened carefully as both attorneys spoke. The HOA's lawyer repeated that fences were inconsistent with the lake's character. Harris's lawyer responded by showing the exact C&R clause and then the discovery emails. She explained that consistency mattered only if rules were written and applied equally. She displayed still frames from the doorbell camera on a large screen. When it was her turn, Mrs. Caldwell said, "I was only protecting the community." The judge leaned forward. "Madam, were you aware that the homeowner had sent a written notice forbidding entry?" She hesitated, then said yes. The judge raised his eyebrows. "And yet you entered?" She nodded. The judge made a note. At the end of the session, the judge spoke firmly. "The purpose of this injunction is to maintain fairness until the case is resolved. The evidence shows the fence does not block an easement, nor does a specific rule require its removal. Therefore, I am granting the injunction. The HOA will stop fines and threats of liens. The trespass issue remains separate." The ruling lifted a weight from Harris's shoulders. For the first time in months, he felt like the storm clouds had parted a little. His fence could stay while the case moved forward, and his family could live without the daily fear of fines stacking up. The HOA board held a closed meeting the following week. Soon after, Harris's attorney received a message. The HOA wanted to discuss settlement. They suggested that if Harris would stain the fence to match community colors, add decorative post caps, and install a small emergency access sign, they would consider the matter resolved. Harris agreed quickly. He was never against compromise. In fact, those were the very steps he had offered months earlier. The difference now was that the HOA was finally treating him fairly. But the trespass count remained separate, directed at Mrs. Caldwell personally. Her attorney reached out privately, asking if Harris would settle that claim too. Harris thought carefully. He did not want revenge. What he wanted was respect, acknowledgement, and closure. After discussion, his attorney drafted terms. She would provide a written apology, step down from her board role, and cover part of Harris's legal costs. In return, the trespass claim would be withdrawn. Negotiations stretched for a few weeks, but eventually, the agreement was signed. the HOA issued a formal notice to all members stating that rules must be applied consistently, with clear citations. They also updated their architectural guidelines, removing vague language and listing specific standards. Neighbors noticed the change. Some came by to say, "Good job standing up." Others simply smiled more warmly than before. The fence, now stained a rich cedar color, looked natural by the lake. The new caps on the posts gave it a neat finish. The small sign on the gate read, "Emergency Access Lift Latch." It was practical and respectful, exactly the kind of solution Harris had wanted from the start. At a spring neighborhood gathering, Harris even brought a tray of snacks and stood by the fire pit chatting with families. The mood was lighter. The conflict had left scars, but it also created clearer rules for everyone. When a new homeowner asked about fence guidelines, the board handed them a printed page with updated language. No more guessing, no more traditions without proof. For Harris, the entire experience carried a simple but powerful lesson: when you stand by the truth calmly, even against strong pressure, fairness eventually rises. He had not shouted or attacked. He had written, documented, and spoken with care. The result was not just a safe fence for his family, but also a stronger community standard for everyone. As he sat on his porch one evening, looking out at the lake beyond his stained fence, Harris thought about how close he had come to giving up in the early days. If he had removed the fence out of fear, none of these changes would have happened. His son might have been less safe, and the community would still be run by unwritten rules. But now, everything was clear. The sound of laughter carried from the trail as neighbors walked past. No one complained. Some even waved at Harris, and he waved back. The fence, once a symbol of division, had become a quiet sign of perseverance. And though the legal paperwork was thick and the months had been heavy, Harris knew the outcome had been worth every page. The settlement was signed, the agreements were filed, and the tension that had weighed on Harris's home for months slowly began to lift. Yet, even though the legal battles had ended, the lessons from the journey were only beginning to show their full meaning. For the first few weeks after the resolution, Harris moved cautiously. He would step onto his porch in the morning and look toward the trail, half expecting to see another notice taped to his fence or someone snapping photos from a distance. But nothing came. Instead, neighbors passed by with more relaxed faces. Some even smiled and offered greetings they had avoided before. One evening, while walking his son along the lakeside path, Harris heard a soft voice behind him. It was the couple who had once hurried past without a word. "We're glad it worked out," the husband said, his tone lighter than before. "We didn't know the full story. We only heard what was posted online." His wife added, "The fence actually looks nice. It blends in with the trees." Harris thanked them. He didn't lecture or explain further. He had learned that calm presence often spoke louder than long explanations. At home, the cedar-stained board stood strong. The new post caps gave the fence a finished look, and the small emergency sign on the gate quietly reassured both neighbors and officials that access would never be blocked. To Harris, those details were not concessions, they were proof that compromise, when offered in good faith, could solve problems without taking away what mattered most. Weeks later, the HOA held its annual meeting. Harris attended, not out of anger, but out of responsibility. The new board chair welcomed everyone and introduced a fresh set of written guidelines. Printed copies were handed out to all members. For the first time, the rules were clear, numbered, and easy to read. Each section referred directly to the CCANDRs or state law. There was no mention of tradition or unwritten standards. The chair addressed the group, "We've updated our process to ensure transparency and fairness. From now on, any violation notice must cite the exact rule being enforced. No exceptions." A round of applause followed. Harris sat quietly, a small smile forming. He didn't need recognition. The moment itself was enough. Later, During the open comment period, a new homeowner stood up. "I just moved in," she said nervously. "I want to put up a playset for my kids. How do I know if it's allowed?" The chair pointed her to the printed guidelines. "Check section 4.3, he said. "It lists the playset standards clearly. If you meet those, you're approved." The woman's face relaxed. The room relaxed. There was no guessing, no fear of hidden rules. In that moment, Harris realized his struggle had done more than protect his own fence. It had reshaped the way the community governed itself. What had started as a personal fight for safety had turned into a community-wide improvement in fairness. As spring turned into summer, Harris decided to host a small gathering in his backyard. He invited the neighbors closest to his home, the ones who had walked past his fence daily through all the tension. He served tea, juice, and simple snacks, while his son played with the children from next door. People laughed, shared stories, and enjoyed the view of the lake. Several neighbors commented on the fence. "It looks like it's always been here," one man said. "You chose a good color." Another added, "That emergency sign is clever. It shows you cared about everyone, not just yourself." Harris accepted the compliments with humility. "I only wanted safety for my son," he said. "And respect for the rules we all signed when we bought here. Nothing more." Not long after, word spread that Mrs. Caldwell had stepped down from the board. Some said she planned to move closer to her daughter's family in another town. Others said she simply wanted to leave the controversy behind. Harris felt no triumph in her departure. He hoped she would find peace in her new place. Conflict had weighed on both of them, and while he had stood firm, he knew the strain had been heavy for her too. The new board members, younger and more open to discussion, adopted friendlier habits. They posted updates about landscaping, playground repairs, and social events instead of focusing only on enforcement. A monthly newsletter highlighted neighbor achievements, such as gardens, volunteer work, and community projects. The whole neighborhood began to feel lighter, less tense. Through it all, Harris kept his binder. He didn't hide it or throw it away. It remained on a shelf in his home office, neatly labeled, filled with the documents, letters, and photos that told the story from start to finish. To him, it was more than a record of conflict. It was a reminder that patience, respect, and careful attention to detail could protect not only a fence, but also one's dignity. One afternoon, Harris's son toddled toward the fence and touched the smooth wood. "Our fence," the little boy said proudly. Harris smiled. "Yes, our fence," he replied. The simple words carried years of meaning: struggle, fear, determination, and finally peace. The lake shimmered in the background, the trail remained open, and the community was learning to move forward. Harris no longer worried about who might be taking photos or posting complaints online. Instead, he focused on the laughter of his family and the gentle rhythm of neighborhood life. The lesson that stayed with him was simple: fairness must be written, not assumed. Power must be balanced with responsibility. And respect, both given and demanded, was the strongest fence of all. As the sun set one evening, painting the water in shades of gold and pink, Harris leaned on the fence rail and thought of how far he had come. What began as a quiet effort to protect his child had turned into a challenge that shaped an entire community. And though the journey had been long and often heavy, the outcome left him with something solid, both in wood and in spirit. The fence stood, strong and steady. The family was safe. The community was fairer. And the story of the HOA conflict became, at last, a memory one told not with bitterness, but with the quiet pride of having stood firm, respectfully, until the truth prevailed.